My boss saved $50,000 by firing me, then lost $2 million. My boss thought he was a modern-day Machiavelli. He looked at the company budget, saw my salary, and thought he'd found the perfect way to trim the fat. He fired me to save a measly $50,000 a year. It was a move he was intensely proud of. What he didn't realize, what his MBA and endless supply of corporate buzzwords could never teach him, was that I wasn't fat to be trimmed. I was the load-bearing wall holding up his entire house of cards. And by removing me, he was personally lighting the fuse on a $2 million disaster. He was about to learn a lesson that echoes in the halls of failed businesses everywhere. The most expensive employee you have isn't the one with the highest salary. It's the one you arrogantly believe you can afford to lose. This is a story about corporate karma, about what happens when arrogance meets incompetence. If you enjoy stories about workplace justice, where the spreadsheet jockeys finally get the last laugh, make sure you subscribe because this is a story you won't want to miss. For 5 years I was the senior financial analyst at a mid-sized tech firm we'll call Apex Innovations. It wasn't a glamorous job, not by a long shot. The office was a sea of open-plan cubicles, filled with the loud, performative energy of the sales team celebrating a new lead, or the intense, silent focus of the coders in their expensive hoodies. I wasn't one of them. I wasn't a hotshot coder inventing the next big thing, and I wasn't a silver-tongued sales guy closing seven-figure deals. I was the guy in the corner cubicle, tucked away behind a wilting office plant, who just made sure the numbers made sense at the end of the day. My boss, a man we'll call Richard, was the polar opposite of me. Richard lived and breathed the persona of a tech visionary. He wore suits that cost more than my rent, had perfectly coiffed hair, and spoke in a language composed almost entirely of jargon he'd picked up from business bestsellers. He was utterly obsessed with synergy, optimization, and disrupting paradigms. I once sat through a 2-hour all-hands meeting where he used the phrase lean forward framework 17 times. He didn't see a company made of people with lives, skills, and institutional knowledge. He saw a spreadsheet. And on his spreadsheet, my $50,000 salary was just a number in a column labeled liabilities. But here's the thing about spreadsheets. They don't show you the precarious, tangled-up reality of how a business actually functions. They don't show the hidden risks, the secret handshakes, the decades of accumulated baggage. Apex had one piece of baggage that was bigger than all the others combined. A massive client, a manufacturing conglomerate I'll call Innovate Corporation. This one client was responsible for nearly 40% of our total annual revenue. They weren't just a client, they were our whale. The problem was, they were a whale we'd landed a decade ago with a bizarre ancient contract that nobody in all that time had ever bothered to properly update or integrate. This contract had a payment process that seemed to be designed by a committee in the 1980s. It wasn't a simple send invoice, get paid deal. Oh no, that would have been far too logical. Payments were tied to dozens of specific project milestones, and each one, every single one, required manual verification and a special reconciliation code that had to be generated and then cross-referenced against 3 separate, non-communicating internal databases. Our brand new 6-figure accounting software, Richard's pride and joy, couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was programmed for the clean, simple world of modern invoicing. Faced with this monstrosity, it just spat out gigabytes of error logs. So, when I first started at Apex and this problem landed on my desk, I built a system to handle it. It was this complex, labyrinthine Frankenstein's monster of a spreadsheet, layered with custom scripts, conditional macros, and lookup tables that would make your eyes water. It was ugly, I'll freely admit it, but it was flawless. It tracked every dollar, every project milestone, every single reconciliation code. It was the only reason we ever got paid correctly and on time by our biggest and most important client. And because I had built it from scratch, through months of late nights and trial and error, I was the only person in the entire company who understood how it actually worked. You see this in a lot of businesses, right? Critical, undocumented knowledge that gets stuck in one person's head. It's a huge, flashing red light of a risk for the business, but it was a risk my boss, the great visionary, couldn't even begin to see. Richard, in his infinite wisdom, saw my little system as inefficient. A bottleneck. He never actually asked why the Innovate Corp account was so complicated or how we were managing it. He just saw me, a guy who cost $50,000 a year, spending a full week every quarter manually reconciling accounts, and decided that was a corner he could and should cut. The day I got fired was a Tuesday. I remember it was raining, a kind of dreary, miserable day that matched the mood that was about to unfold. Richard called me into his glass-walled office, a smug little smile playing on his lips that he was trying to disguise as compassionate seriousness. He gestured for me to sit, then leaned back in his high-backed leather chair like he was some corporate titan about to announce a world-changing merger. "We're making some tough but necessary changes," he started, steepling his fingers. We're optimizing our workflows, moving towards a more streamlined, automated future. And unfortunately, that means your role has become redundant. Redundant. After 5 years of single-handedly making sure 40% of the company's revenue didn't just vanish into a black hole of contractual loopholes. He explained that by eliminating my position, the company would save my salary. A smart, lean business decision that would look fantastic on the next quarterly report for the board. He was so proud of himself, so utterly convinced of his own genius. He genuinely thought he was a hero for finding this $50,000 saving. I had to try. I owed it to the company and to myself. Richard, I said, keeping my voice as steady and professional as I possibly could. I understand the need for efficiency. But who is going to handle the Innovate Corp reconciliation? It's a very specific manual process. The main accounting software can't handle it, remember? He just waved his hand dismissively, a gesture I'd seen 100 times in meetings when anyone brought up a detail that complicated his grand vision. We're hiring a new junior accountant fresh out of college. Cheaper, and they'll be eager to learn. We'll give them your files. How hard can it be? It's just matching numbers, right? I knew right then it was a lost cause. Arguing with Richard was like arguing with a brick wall, if the brick wall thought it was a visionary architect. He didn't want details. He wanted to feel like he'd made a decisive cost-cutting move that he could brag about. So I just nodded. I spent my last 2 weeks dutifully putting together a handover document. It felt like a futile exercise, like trying to teach quantum physics with a handful of post-it notes. I wrote down everything I could, trying to explain the logic of the macros, the purpose of the cross-referencing, the exact sequence of operations. I put a section in bold 48-point red font right at the top. Critical. Do not simply mark Innovate Corp invoices as paid when funds are received. Each payment must be manually reconciled against the milestone verification codes in tab C of the master spreadsheet. Failure to do this will result in a material breach of contract with Innovate Corp and could trigger a full clawback of all payments. On my last day, I had a brief meeting with my replacement, a nervous kid who couldn't have been older than 20, fresh out of university with a degree in accounting. He looked at my spreadsheet with wide, terrified eyes. Wow, he mumbled. That's a lot of formulas. I handed him the documentation. I wished him luck, and I meant it. He was going to need it. As I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a kind of detached certainty. For 5 years I had built and maintained the wall that protected the castle's treasury. Richard the King had just mistaken it for a decorative fence and paid a kid with a sledgehammer to knock it down. All I could do was walk away before the roof caved in. For the first 2 months I enjoyed my severance pay. I updated my resume, decompressed, and started looking for a new job. The market was good for people with my skills, and within 6 weeks, I had landed a better-paying role as a senior analyst at a more stable, mature company. It was a breath of fresh air. They had processes. They had documentation. They valued expertise over buzzwords. Life moved on. I almost forgot about Apex and my so-called redundant role. Then about 3 months after my departure, I got a text message out of the blue. It was from an old colleague, Sarah, from the sales department at Apex. Hey, weird question, it read. Are you hearing anything from Innovate Corp? They've gone completely silent on us. Missing meetings, not returning calls. It's weird. I told her I hadn't heard a thing. But my heart skipped a beat. I knew the rhythm of that client. 3 months. That meant a full quarter had passed. A full cycle of payments would have been made. And the Innovate Corp semi-annual audit was always scheduled at the end of the next quarter. The clock was ticking louder than ever. I learned later what had happened. The new junior accountant, bless his heart, did exactly what you'd expect a 20-year-old to do when faced with my monstrous spreadsheet and a boss who told him to be efficient. He took one look at my creation, a relic from a bygone era in his eyes, decided it was certifiably insane and promptly ignored it. He did exactly what Richard had told him to do. He streamlined. He just started marking their multi-million-dollar invoices as paid in the main accounting system as soon as the money hit the bank. He didn't bother with the reconciliation codes or the milestone verification. To him the numbers matched. The bank statement said $2 million had arrived. The invoice said $2 million was due. Job done. He probably thought he was a genius, that he'd outsmarted the old guy who built that crazy system. For a couple of months, on the surface, everything seemed fine. The revenue charts looked great. The money was still coming in. Richard was probably strutting around the office, patting himself on the back, bragging to the board about his brilliant $50,000 saving and the new efficient process. He had absolutely no idea that according to the fine print of the contract he'd never read, Apex hadn't proven they'd earned a single cent of that money. They were cashing multi-million-dollar checks without providing the contractually obligated proof that the work was even completed. The bomb was armed. The timer was rapidly counting down. And the only person on the planet who knew how to defuse it was now sitting across town, happily organizing his new desk and getting praised for his meticulous attention to detail. The explosion came exactly 6 months and 2 days after I was fired. I got another call from Sarah. This time there was no casual text message. She called me and her voice was a full-blown panic. "It's over," she said, her voice shaking. "Innovate Corporation. It all just blew up." Innovate Corp's semi-annual audit had happened. Their legal team, known for being incredibly thorough and ruthless, had sent an official letter via courier that morning. It was, by Sarah's account, brutal and surgical. They invoked the breach of contract clause, the one I had put in giant red letters in my handover notes. Since Apex had failed to provide the required payment reconciliations for the last 2 quarters, they were in material breach. And the penalty for that breach was simple and catastrophic. Innovate Corp was legally clawing back every single dollar they had paid in that time. The total amount? A little over $2 million. And to pour salt on the gaping wound, they were also immediately terminating their decade-long relationship with Apex Innovations, effective immediately. The whale, the foundation of the company's revenue, was gone. The fallout was an extinction-level event for the company. $2 million didn't just disappear from a projection. It was physically removed from the company's accounts. Losing their biggest client simultaneously slashed their projected revenue for the next year by 40%. The stock price for the portion that was publicly traded plummeted. Sarah said the news sent shockwaves through the entire office. Rumors of mass layoffs started instantly. People were huddled in corridors, whispering, updating their resumes. It was a complete financial collapse, all stemming from one smart, lean business decision. That evening I was at home making dinner when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID was Richard. I almost laughed. I considered for a long moment just letting it go to voicemail. But my curiosity, that little devil on my shoulder, got the better of me. I had to hear this. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. The voice on the other end wasn't the confident, arrogant, buzzword-spouting boss I remembered. It was the thin, reedy voice of a man whose entire world had just crumbled around him, leaving him standing in the wreckage. There's been a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "A huge misunderstanding with the Innovate account. A paperwork issue. We need you to come back. Just as a consultant. Name your price. Seriously, anything you want. We need you to fix this." I let the silence hang in the air for a second longer than was comfortable, just listening to his ragged, desperate breathing. He wasn't asking for help. He was begging for a miracle. He was the arsonist calling the firefighter he had fired months earlier. "Richard," I said, and I was proud of how calm and steady my voice was, the same tone I had used in his office when I tried to warn him. "I told you exactly what would happen. I left a detailed 20-page document explaining the entire process. I highlighted the critical clause in red. You told me my role was redundant. I know, I was an idiot. A complete idiot," he pleaded, all pretense of authority gone. "The kid we hired, he's useless. He has no idea what he's doing. The files are a mess. Innovate won't even take my calls. Please, you're the only one who understands the old system, the only one who can talk to them, who can try to rebuild the records." And right then, in that moment, I could have been his savior. I could have named an outrageous consulting fee. I could have gone back in there, been the hero. But I thought about the smug look on his face when he fired me. I thought about the word redundant. I thought about how he saw me as nothing more than a cost on a spreadsheet. And then a beautiful, perfect lie formed in my mind. "I'm sorry, Richard, but I can't help you," I said. "When I joined my new company, I had to sign a very strict non-compete agreement. A very, very strict one. I am legally forbidden from performing any work, consulting or otherwise, for a direct competitor. And as you know, Apex Innovations is listed as a primary competitor." It was a lie. A gorgeous, perfect, ironclad lie. My new job had no such clause. But he didn't know that. All he knew was that the door he had so smugly slammed shut 6 months ago was now bolted, locked, and barricaded from the other side. There was just this long, defeated silence on the phone. A void where his hope had been. I heard him whisper something that sounded like, "Oh God," and then he hung up. Apex Innovations didn't survive. The $2 million loss, combined with the immediate disappearance of 40% of their future income, was a death blow from which they could not recover. They laid off over half their staff within a month. My friend Sarah, thankfully, landed on her feet, and I was able to help her get an interview at my new company. A few months after that, the remnants of Apex were quietly bought out by a larger competitor for pennies on the dollar, mostly for their intellectual property. Richard was, of course, fired during the acquisition. His reputation in the industry was completely shattered. The story of his $2 million blunder became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones at industry happy hours. He finally learned the brutal difference between the cost of an employee and their value. As for me, I'm thriving. I got a promotion last year at my new job, where I'm not just a cog in a machine, but a respected expert. My Frankenstein spreadsheets are now seen as elegant solutions to complex problems. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a loud, dramatic explosion. Sometimes it's just stepping aside at the right moment and calmly watching an arrogant boss get blown up by his own ticking time bomb. Thanks for listening. If you want more stories of corporate karma and workplace justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Licks and share and tell us where you are watching from. And we'd love to read your stories in the comments. Have you ever had a boss who was penny wise but $1 million foolish? See you in the next one.